I always considered myself an ordinary student studying at a small college in the town. I spent most of my time in the library. This place was always a quiet haven where I could escape from daily problems and immerse myself in books. But one night, everything changed. It was a Wednesday, and I was preparing for an important history exam. The library, as usual, was almost empty. Only a few students wandered between the shelves, and the librarian, Mrs. Lilly, sat at her desk absorbed in some old book. I chose a spot in the far corner of the library, where it was usually the quietest. Hours flew by, and I didn't even notice how closing time approached. Mrs. Lilly announced that the library would close in 10 minutes. I gathered my things and was ready to leave when I remembered that I had left my notes in the reading room on the second floor. In a hurry, I went up there, but when I returned, the entrance doors were already closed. Panic started to rise in me, but I decided that the best option was to find Mrs. Lilly and ask her to open the door. I began searching for her throughout the library, but she had disappeared. No trace, only silence and the dim light from the old lamps. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound. It was the creak of a door in the old part of the library, which was closed to visitors. I decided to check, thinking that perhaps Mrs. Lilly was there. Approaching closer, I noticed that the door was slightly open. I went inside and saw long rows of old bookshelves covered in dust. The air here was heavy and suffocating. My heart started pounding faster when I realized I heard footsteps behind me. I quickly turned around but saw no one. Maybe it was just the wind, I thought, but the feeling of unease didn't leave me. I decided to go further, hoping to find an exit. As I walked between the shelves, I heard the footsteps again. Now they were closer. I stopped and turned around, but again saw no one. This was starting to scare me. Suddenly, I heard a whisper. The words were indistinguishable, but they were clearly directed at me. I decided to find the source of the sound, no matter how scary it was. As I walked between the shelves, I saw light at the end of the corridor. Approaching closer, I saw an old storage room. The door was slightly open, and soft light poured from inside. I cautiously opened the door and peeked inside. On the floor sat a girl who looked like she had been there for many years. Her face was familiar. It was Mary, a student who disappeared last year. Her eyes were empty, and her hair was disheveled. "Mary?" I asked, not believing my eyes. She raised her head and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Help me," she said quietly. I approached closer, trying to understand what had happened to her. She was holding an old book that looked very valuable. "What happened?" I asked, sitting down next to her. "I can't find the way out," she replied. "They won't let me go." "Who are they?" I asked, puzzled. She just looked at me with horror in her eyes and whispered, "The librarians." My heart started pounding faster. I didn't understand what she meant, but her fear was real. I decided we needed to act. We had to find a way out of here together. I helped Mary get up, and we started looking for an exit from this old part of the library. Several minutes passed when I realized we were constantly returning to the same place. The corridors seemed endless, and the shelves infinite. Suddenly, we heard footsteps behind us. Turning around, I saw a shadow moving between the shelves. We started running, trying to find an exit. The footsteps grew closer, and we got more and more entangled in the maze of books. Finally, we found a door leading to the first floor. Opening it, we found ourselves in a familiar part of the library, but here a new challenge awaited us. Mrs. Lily stood by the exit, looking at us with a cold gaze. "You shouldn't have gone into the old part of the library," she said. "We're just looking for an exit," I replied, trying to hide my fear. "The exit was always here," she said and opened the door. Mary and I quickly stepped outside, feeling the cold air engulf us. I turned to thank Mrs. Lily, but she was already gone. The library doors were closed, and silence reigned around us. After that night, I never returned to the library. Mary went missing again, and no one saw her anymore. I will always remember the horror I felt in the old part of the library. Sometimes at night, it seems I hear a whisper calling me back, but I know I will never cross that threshold again. I'm a librarian. This is something that happened a few years ago at the library that I used to work at. This library was pretty close to my apartment, so close that occasionally I would walk to and from work. Now, it was about a 15-minute walk, so I only really did this when the weather was nice or if I wanted extra exercise or just felt like it. The library that I worked in I would describe as pretty average-sized. It was not that small, but also not too large. I really enjoyed it for the most part. Well, one night I was working until the time we closed at 8 p.m. I had walked to work that day, so I would be walking back as well. Things quieted down in the library significantly in the last hour that we were open. By the time 8 p.m. rolled around, I was the only person there. I then went over, I locked the doors and then went around the library, making sure that everything was in order. After that, I was able to leave. I started walking home, which would be on several different sidewalks. Normally, when I would walk home after a closing shift, I would be the only person on the sidewalk for most of the way. It really wasn't that common of an area for people to walk, especially at night. But on this night, literally within the first minute, I heard somebody walking behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw a hooded man wearing a gray sweatshirt trailing me a ways back. Instantly, I was nervous, and I didn't want to cause myself to panic or anything. I told myself that it was fine. But as I kept walking, the man remained behind me. When I turned, he did as well. I remember at that point I took a wrong turn intentionally onto a different road that was sort of out of my way. The man behind me did the same thing. Then, at the end of that block, I turned back and reconnected with the road that we had been on. The man still did the same thing. At that point, it confirmed to me that he was following me intentionally. This made me really nervous. I also realized that I had not brought my pepper spray with me to work. Normally, when I walk to work, I do, but I forgot on this day, which was bad luck. So I kept walking back home, and the man remained the same distance back. Soon, though, I reached a McDonald's restaurant. Never in my life was I so happy to see one. They were open, and I walked inside. When I did, the man did not go in but seemed to stop somewhere in the parking lot. After going in, I waited and texted my friend Mina. I told her of the situation and asked her to come and pick me up. She agreed, and luckily she lived very close to me, so within 5 minutes, she had arrived. I quickly left the restaurant and went into her car. We drove away, and I did not notice the man when we left. But luckily, I made it back home safely. After that, I didn't walk to work for a while, but that's not the last I saw of the man. This was probably almost a week later, and I was working another closing shift. I was behind the counter where I would usually work. From my view, I could see several bookshelves as well as some of the computers that we had. I remember at about 7:30 p.m., the library had become very quiet. I had only noticed a couple of people here and there, and some had left. Then I casually looked around and noticed that the same man who had followed me home was sitting at one of the computer desks. He looked up at me, and it really creeped me out. I tried my best not to look at him, but when I glanced back over, he was gone. I was really glad to see that soon it was 8 o'clock. I just hoped that the man had actually left the library. I went over and locked the doors like usual. Then I went around the library to make sure everything was in order. Now, I had already done the announcements, such as, "The library is closing in 10 minutes," and "The library is now closed." Those announcements were made so if anybody was here, they knew that they were supposed to be gone by now. I went around the library, going up and down each aisle of bookshelves. Everything was empty, but when I approached the back corner of the library, I heard a noise. I looked over and saw that the same man was still here, and he was entering the aisle that I was in. My heart instantly started racing. I told the man that we were closed. He didn't answer me or say anything but kept approaching. I moved away and ran out of the aisle. I went to the next one over and heard the man coming after me. I then ran out of that aisle and quickly into another one, trying to confuse the man. I was able to stay ahead of him, going from one aisle to another like it was a maze. I heard footsteps in the distance but couldn't tell exactly where the man was. I then slowed down and tried to listen better. When I did, it seemed like he slowed down too. Very carefully, I moved out to another aisle. I needed to get to the front of the library where the doors were. I slowly moved over to the side wall and then went alongside it. I heard the man starting to approach, so I had to stop. I went around a corner into a little nook area where a comfortable chair was for reading. I went behind the chair and hid. The man walked closer but did not know exactly where I was, so he didn't go to the exact area but got within maybe 30 feet. He passed by and moved a little farther down from where I was. Then I carefully and quietly moved out from my hiding place. I walked back along the side wall until I could see the front doors. When I did, I started sprinting for them. When I did this, it gave away my location. The man started running after me, but he was a long way away. I made it to the doors and went outside. Then I got to my car, quickly went inside, and then watched the front doors. But the man did not leave. I called the police and waited there in my car. The police got there a short time later. They went inside and soon came out with the man. I was very grateful to have escaped. Looking back, I honestly don't know how I did it. I worked at that library for a few more months and then changed locations to where I currently work. We moved to a new town when I was 6. Any memories before that move I consider to be very early childhood, and a lot of those memories are blurry at this point. This is one of those memories. This happened at some age before 6. If I had to guess, I was 5. There was the local town library that our mom would always take my brothers and me to. It was a few blocks away. Actually, I remember this one day. It was my mom and my little brother, who was a toddler at this point. We started the day at the mall, probably spent hours there tagging along with our mom shopping. Whenever we'd go to this mall, she'd always bring us to the inside the mall to get us ice cream cones. I remember we got ice cream on this particular day because on the way to the library after leaving the mall, I still had some of the cone left in my hand. We arrived at the library, and there was this kids' computer section that my mom would let me stay at and play computer games while she went and did whatever she'd do. When I got bored of playing whatever old online computer games there were at the time, I got up and started walking through the aisles of books in the kids section of the library, looking for the books. The kids section was in the far corner of the library, and while I was walking from aisle to aisle, I heard a peep from behind me. I turned around and saw nothing. I was looking at the back wall of the library, which had another shelf of books leaning on it. Then I saw half of a grown man's face peer around the shelf and say, "Peekaboo." I remember laughing and feeling no sense of danger. He did it again. He went back behind the shelf, then peered out his head again and said, "Peekaboo," again. I laughed. He asked me what I was looking for, and I said the books. He said he'd help me find them. He came over and took my hand and started leading me through the aisles, leading us, I guess, to the section of books that began with the letter I. And there they were, at least 5 I Spy books next to each other. I grabbed my favorite one, the treasure hunt one, and he said, "Let's go sit down and play." He led me to a table in the corner by a couple of children's computers, and we started looking through the pictures. This went on for some time, and he was asking me questions about myself as we played I Spy. The question that still sticks out to me the most is, "Who are you here with?" And I told him, "My mom and little brother." At some point after this, he said something implying that there's a kid's playroom downstairs. I, at that age, never knew that there was a downstairs to the library. He said we could take the book down there. He led me to the door that led to the basement of the library, which, for reference, is actually where events and meetings for certain clubs and organizations are held, and there is actually a little playroom down there, I guess for parents who have to bring their kids with them during any of the meetings. The man led me to that little playroom. There were various toys in there, most notably a Lego set and a Lego table, and then there were a bunch of chairs. He set the I Spy book down on the Lego table. This is where things get really uncomfortable thinking back on it, as he was trying to forcibly get me to play with the toys. I started to get uncomfortable, and around this time, over the loudspeaker, a female librarian said into the intercom, "Will John come to the front, please? Your mother is looking for you." At this time, the man went to turn off the lights in the room, and now it was pitch black inside. He said in the dark, "We're going to play hide and seek." This was the first moment I was genuinely freaked out, and I started to yell for my mom. I remember he kept telling me to be quiet, and his voice was getting louder as he was getting closer to me in the dark until he had his hands on me. I thankfully managed to run past him and out the door of that room. I ran down the dark hallway back to the stairs. As I was running up the stairs, I had that same childhood feeling of running up the basement stairs after turning off the lights, only 100 times worse because I genuinely was scared I was going to be grabbed. I made it back to the main floor of the library and ran straight to the front desk, calling for my mom. She was at the front desk with a group of librarians, and I remember the relief on my mom's face when she saw me. I told her there was some man who took me downstairs, and she literally lost it. The next thing I remember from there was a bunch of police in the building searching around, but I never saw that man again. He must have exited the building through a different way. I remember speaking to some woman who was probably with the police, asking me very delicate questions. I never really asked my mom about this experience that many times because it's very uncomfortable, and I'd rather just not think of it. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.